Hi, my name is Pappy Bedard. I am a retired engineer and a Cinema 4D hobbyist. And today I want to show you how I simulated this robot arm 3D printer using inverse kinematics, or IK. So I posted these two fun little projects I did on various Cinema 4D interest groups on Facebook. And I got so much feedback on it and so many requests for a tutorial that here it is. So here's the first one I did, where it actually uses a spirograph pattern as a spline. And you can check my channel and you'll see I have another tutorial on how to create that spline shape. The second one I posted was a simulation of like a 3D printer building up the shape of a skull and winding up kind of looking like a coffee mug. And it was done by creating a helix and shrink wrapping it onto a skull. So without further ado, here's how I did it. So I'm going to start right here. I'm not going to show you how to make cylinders or spheres or this shape right here. I'll assume that you know how to do that. I based this part of it on what I've learned by watching Sam Winter's tutorial at Digital Meat. I'm going to provide a link in the description. He goes step by step how to build something like this and how to make the IK chain work. But I'll give you a very quick example of it. So I've got 3 spheres, a couple of cylinders, and I'm going to stack them up into a robot arm. Now I've already made all of the cylinders editable, and by default the axis point is in the center, and what I need to do is make that at the end, at one end, because that will become the hinge or the joint in the robot arm. So to do that, I'm going to select this cylinder here, which you see it's already editable, and its axis is in the center. If I go up to Mesh and Axis Center, and then I just make the uncheck this point to center and make Y 0 or minus 100 actually. Execute that, and you'll see that now the axis point's right at the bottom. So now I'm going to stack these up. So I'll select this sphere, and I already have a shortcut here to PSR 0 that sets the position, scale, and rotation to 0. And I'll let you Google that if you don't know what that is. And I'm also going to click this drop to floor. That's a plugin that you can get that makes it just positions the object you select so that its lowest point is right at this XY0 plane. I'll provide a link for that so you can download that plugin too. It's a free one. So that's my first joint. Now I want to put that at 0. So I'll click PSR 0, but I want it to be up. Let's see, that sphere is a 10 centimeter diameter. So I will make the cylinder coordinate 10 in the Y. So it's right at the center of the sphere. That would make its top 90, since these are 80 tall, you can see down here. So the top of this is 90, so the next sphere I'll do PSR 0 and make it 90. This next one I've already set the axis at the bottom. We'll set that to 0 and put that at 90. And The next sphere is going to have to be 90 plus 80, that's 170. So I'll zero that out, put that at 170. This one also is supposed to be at 170. I'm right clicking on this double arrow to zero that, make that 170. And finally I have this little ball, which I'll start by putting it at 170, but I want that to be the tip. So let's zoom in on that. I'll pull that up here, and I can make this diameter a lot smaller. Let's just make it 0.5. And I'll explain in a minute why I put this tip. Each one of these is a joint, and at the very end is a target. So I want this to be the target for the IK chain. Now IK stands for inverse kinematics. There's forward kinematics and inverse kinematics. Forward means that you first have to move the shoulder, then the elbow, then the wrist in order to position the tip. But with inverse, you can position a tip anywhere you want, and the rest of the arm just does whatever positions it needs to put that point at the target you want. Now, one thing you have to do is stack these into a hierarchy. So I'm going to put tip under the pen, pen under the sphere, sphere under the cylinder. So it goes from base to tip in this hierarchy. And it's kind of like an arm. Your arm only bends one way. Your elbow can't bend backwards. So in order for Cinema 4D to know which way to build that arm, you need to rotate this a little bit so it knows. So I'm just going to rotate this sphere by, let's say, 4. See that? Then I'll pick this sphere, rotate that by 4. And this one, rotate that by 4. And finally the pen body, I'll rotate that by 4. So now it's going to know which way this arm can bend. The next thing you do is select the two ends of this hierarchy. So I'm going to select the base, then hold down Control and select the tip. So base and tip are selected, and then go over to Character. And select Create IK Chain. Now what that did is it created a null object called tip goal. Tip is just the name of the sphere, so it would be whatever that final object is, dot goal. That becomes the thing that you can move. So if I grab that tip and move it around, oh, I see what I did wrong. I selected the base. So let's just undo all this. Okay, and let's see, everything's in the right spot. I don't want to select the base. I want this first joint and the tip. And let's do that again. Character, create IK chain. Okay, now the base stays put. So what's cool is now you can animate the position of that tip, and the robot arm will just follow along. So it's pretty cool. So now how can you animate where that position is? Well, of course you could create a spline and have it follow along a spline, which is kind of what I wanted to do. So the next thing I want to do is create I'll just create a simple spline for now. So I'll just go in here. We'll create a flower, let's say, and we want that to be on the XZ plane. My system's a little slow here. I think it's because I'm recording, and we're going to shrink this down a lot. Actually, I could just scale it. And then move it out here where the pen can reach it. And now I'm going to create a MoGraph object called MoSpline, and change this mode to spline, and then over on the spline tab drop this flower in there. So now the MoSpline creates a new object that follows that spline, but what's nice about it is over on the object tab you could change where it ends. So now I'm going to select the tip goal and add an animation tag called align to spline, and the spline path that I want to align to is the MoSpline. And it went to some crazy position because it has no idea where 0 is. No, we'll make it 100, and then over on the MoSpline we'll make the end 0.1. There we go. So now if we animate this end parameter of the MoSpline, you can see that it'll make the robot arm follow that shape. So that's pretty cool. So that's the basic principle of what I did for these videos. All I did was have to create the right kind of a spline for it to follow. So, well, let's just go ahead and do that. I'll set this to 0.01, and I'll keyframe that, and then I'll go to the end, I'll make it 100, and then I'll add a keyframe here. So now if I play this, it's going to draw that spline. Pretty cool. Okay. So the last thing I could do is to create a sweep, and let's create let's say a rectangle. Let's make it very small, 3 by 3. Round it, put it on the XZ plane, and then put the MoSpline in the sweep and the rectangle in the sweep. So now we're creating some geometry. Just give that a quick render. So now it's just a matter of creating some materials and lighting and making it look nice. Now, let's try a different kind of a spline. So I'm just going to delete this flower. Well, I won't delete it yet. I'll just get rid of it here. Interesting. Even when it's not there, this still works. Okay. I'm going to delete it. Yeah, now it won't work. Okay, so now let's create something else. How about a helix? And again, let's put this on the XZ plane. Let's make it a lot smaller. Say 10 and 10. And let's see, the height. Let's just make it 80. Move it out here. I guess I can make it a little bigger than 10. How about 44? Okay, now let's give it a lot more loops. So this degrees here, 720, that's twice around. Let's make it 100 times around. So that would be 360 times 100. 36,000 degrees. Oh, it just turns into a straight line. Well, why is that? It's because we don't have enough subdivisions. So let's multiply that by 100. There we go. There's 100 times around. So now let's make this pen follow that. So again, I'm going to click on the MoSpline, and this time I'm going to put the helix in there. Let's see. First I've got to use spline, and now I should be able to just hit play, and there it goes. It's building this. Let's put a few less items in it. Let's divide that by let's divide it by 3. Okay, let's start over again. Yeah, that's pretty good. Now it looks like we could hide the original one just by, I'm not sure this will work. Turn that off. Yeah, it still works. I'm surprised when you disable it, it still connects. Anyways, so that is the basis for how I did the skull. But now, obviously, this is a pretty simple shape. How do I make this helix conform to the shape of a skull? Well, the first thing we're going to need is a skull. Now, where did I get that skull model? Well, here's where I got it. Let's just open up Google here. And if you search for Video Copilot Halloween Pack, like that, Video Copilot Halloween Pack, there's this free Andrew Cramer who runs Video Copilot. Great plugins for After Effects, and fantastic tutorial giver. He's the guy that taught me so much in the early days when I started. Anyways, if we go to this free model pack, he's a very generous guy. Not only does he do lots of free tutorials, but he gives you free resources like this. So, Andrew Cramer, remember that guy. Search YouTube for him and you'll see all kinds of great stuff. Or go to this site, videocopilot.com. Also, I'll put a link to this in the description. So right here you can download the Halloween pack and experiment now. So what it's a zip file, and in that zip file you'll see a skull in the zip file along with a bunch of other stuff. And if you open that zip file that you downloaded, you'll see this contents, and right there is a skull.obj. Once you unzip it, you can just drag it into Cinema 4D. You could zoom in and set your settings like this. I think it'll work fine. And there's your skull. Once you get the skull in there, you could add materials to it, make it look how you want it to look. And then if you want, or you probably should, go up into File and Save Object Preset and give it a name. And then it will wind up in your content browser under the user area. So let's go back to our project here, and I'll go to the content browser, and so there's the skull that I had brought in. I'll double click it to bring it into the project. Go back to the view, and okay, where is it? Oh, there it is. It's very large, so what we're going to do is we'll grab this base and scale it so it'll match. Push that over a little bit. Let's see. Let's make it about half that size. Something like that. Move that over. And we got to change that helix to wrap around that skull. So I'm going to select the skull, go into the 4 views. Now, if you hold down Alt and click this button, Frame Selected Objects, it'll do all 4 windows. So there's the skull in all 4 windows. And where's my... I'm going to turn off the sweep and the MoSpline and everything right now. We'll just concentrate on the helix. And I'm going to make that a lot bigger. Well, let's say 400. End at 400. And a lot taller. Oh, I can't see it. Okay, there it is. I didn't need to make it that big. Let's make it 250. I'll move the skull into the middle of it. That looks like it'll wrap around it. Now I got to make it a lot taller. So that would be height. I can't seem to scroll that in real time while I'm recording. So let's see, if that's 80, I could probably make it, I don't know, 400. $600. All right, so now we probably could go ahead with and do the 100 loops. That would be 36,000. Okay. I'm going to put that skull down to the bottom by hitting drop to floor. Yeah, now we can make this a little bit smaller. Let's say 550. 500. I'll just leave it there. Okay. Now, one of the things about the skull, I'm going to go ahead and hide that sweep again. I mean the helix again for right now. Go back to this view. Now, if you look at that skull, you can see that it's actually 2 separate objects, is the chin and the skull part. I'm going to select both of those, right click and say connect objects and delete. And then we'll pull that out of here. Delete this null. Let's call that skull. And I turn the MoSpline back on. Oh yeah. So we still have this animation going. Let's just go to the end so it's 100 so we can see it all. Looks like I'll have to make this a little bit bigger. So back to the base. Scale that up. Maybe move it out here. I might have to redo the the IK chain, since we scaled it, it seems to be moving a little weird. Try that. I'll get rid of this tip goal and get rid of this tag, and then let's see, if I look at the coordinates, I could zero all these out. I'm just right clicking on the little arrows there to set them to 0. Looks like that first sphere is way off. I don't know what happened there. Yeah, it's probably because I moved it. Well, it's all off. Well, let's just get it into rough position here. I guess that's okay. That looks like it'll probably do okay. All right, let's rebuild this. Click on the sphere and the tip. Character, create IK chain. Tip goal, I'm just going to move that down here. And we will set the tip goal to align to spline. And in the spline, we will put the MoSpline. And we'll set that to 100. 100. Let's just double check this. So if I move to a different point in the timeline, okay, that's working now. So apparently when you scale an IK chain, you got to rebuild it. I'm actually going to go ahead and disable this tag for now, so that, and then I'm going to hide this whole thing, just so we can work on making that spline align to the helix, rather, align to the skull. So the way I said I did this, if I can remember, is to create create a shrink wrap, put that under the helix, and then the object we want to target is this skull. And right now it's set to along normals. We want to change that to target axis. So that shrunk it down to wrap around the skull. So let's hide the skull for now. Let's see if this works. Yeah, that works. And turn the MoSpline back on and the sweep. See what that looks like. Well, it looks like the little rails are way too small. So one way you can change that is to go into the MoSpline object. I think it's object, yeah, in the spline tab, and then change this to a different dimension. Let's say 10 centimeters. That should make everything bigger. Let's see how that looks rendered. It looks pretty weird in the viewport. Yeah, well, that's not too bad. Let's see, what did I do with the skull? I'll turn skull off from rendering. Try that again. So that's kind of what it looked like in video. So now everything should be connected. So let's see, if I go back to the beginning, I'll leave the skull off. Let's see, the helix is on, the sweep is on. Oh, I did disable this. I'm going to re-enable it. And I'm going to unhide the base. And we are going to also hide the spline itself. Let's see, the MoSpline has a source of the helix. Okay. All right, I'm going to hide the helix. So now if I hit, let's zoom out a little bit here. And hit play. And that's pretty much how I did it. Now, I believe I rendered it with Redshift, because when I was using a standard renderer for this, I actually increased the frames to 3,000 frames, I believe. So it was a long video, and it took a long time to render. It was like 11 hours with Redshift. It would have been almost impossible with standard or physical. Let's play this to the end. See, it doesn't look like it's looping around because there's not enough frames. Every single step, it goes an entire circle. So to see them all, let's actually do this. I'll change this to 3,000. Stretch this out. And then, let's see, in the MoSpline object where I animated this, so let's see, go to the next key. So that's where it was set to 100. I'm going to clear this keyframe and then go all the way to the end and make this 100 and add that keyframe. All right, so now we'll just go somewhere in the middle here. Now if I play it, see, now there's enough frames for you to see it moving. All right, so let's stop it here, zoom in a little bit, do a render, and there you go. That's how I did it. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video and that you can get some use out of it. I really appreciate all the thumbs ups and happy faces and everything else you gave me on Facebook, and I appreciate all the requests for this tutorial. So I hope it's gives you what you expected, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot.